Okay, so this is the fourth in a series of three. That's clever, isn't it? Fourth in a series of three shiurim on Shmita. It was a little bit, what's the word? Ambitious to have thought I could get it done in three. What we have done so far, let's have a quick recap. We spent the first 2 weeks looking at what Shmita actually was, where it came from, the psukim in the Torah. We spoke about the things that you can't do on Shmita, during Shmita: sowing, ploughing, pruning, gathering, harvesting. And we also spoke about the things that you must do, which is to renounce ownership of your field, to eat the Shmita produce as best as you can, and to guard the holiness, the sanctity of the Shmita produce. That's what we did in the first 2 weeks. And then we talked about the way you can plant and can't plant with detached bedding, plant pots with holes in them, etc. And then in the third week, last week, we spoke about the way to go shopping in Shmita, how best to deal with the produce. We spoke about the concept of Otzer Bet Din, the way that the Bet Din appoints agents to collect the produce from the field and pays the workers for doing that, but doesn't actually pay for the produce itself. We spoke about the Heter Mechira, and I gave you a handout with all the details of how the Heter Mechira came about and what it means. So this week, what I want to do is to finish off by talking about how we manage our kitchens during Shmita, what we have to do with Shmita produce. Now, let's just start by prefacing this whole thing by saying that the Shmita sanctity only applies, and it sounds very obvious, but it's you'll see where I'm coming from hopefully soon. It only applies to what I will call proper Shmita produce. Now, let's have a look. Let's go back to the beginning and look at our psukim, where the whole Shmita thing comes from. Those of you who've got the printout and printed it out, it's on page 1. Those of you that don't, you can see it on the screen now. I hope. Somebody give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Yeah, excellent. Let's just get that out of the way. There we go. So, Bahar, Parshat Bahar in Vayikra chapter 25. Hashem spoke to Moshe. Speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them, when you come to the land that I am giving you, the land shall rest a Sabbath to the Lord. You may sow your field for 6 years, and for 6 years may prune your vineyard and gather in its produce. In the 7th year, the land shall have a complete rest. Shabbat Lashem. Okay, Shabbat Lashem. You shall not sow your field, you shall not prune your vineyard, you shall not reap the aftergrowth, you shall not pick the grapes. And the produce of the Sabbath of the land shall be yours to eat. This is the important pasuk that we're going to see now. V'hayeta Shabbat haaretz lachem le'ochla. And it shall be, the Shabbat of the land shall be for you to eat. Lacha, for you. L'avdecha, for your servant. La'amatecha, for your lady servant. L'schircha, for your hired worker. Toshavcha, your residents. Hagarami who lives with you. And also for your animals. Livhentecha v'lchaya shabertzech. Tiyeh kol tevuata le'echol. All the produce should be for eating. Now, the key words here are Shabbat haaretz, a Sabbath of the land, and le'ochla, for eating. Now, what does the Sabbath of the land mean? Shabbat haaretz. What is the main ingredient, if you like, of Shabbat? On Shabbat, we rest, okay? But what is the main ingredient of Shabbat? Shabbat is, I was to say to you, Shabbat is a what day? What adjective would you put in there? Any offers? Vivian, come on, tell us. Unmute yourself and tell us what adjective you would use.
Holy.
Holy, thank you very much. Right on cue. Shabbat is a holy day. So if Shabbat is a holy day, then Shabbat haaretz must mean that the land and that which comes out of the land during the Shemitah year is Shabbat. It's holy. So it has a level of holiness. And that word in Hebrew for holiness, of course, is kedusha. When we stand up and we say kedusha in the middle of Shemona Esrei, that is because we're saying the words kadosh, 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 holy, holy, holy. So the word kedusha is holiness. Shabbat is a holy day. So there is some sanctity, some holiness that attaches itself, as it were, to the produce of the land during Shemitah. Now, something that is holy, something that is sanctified, we have to treat with a special degree of respect. Something that is holy. What's the most holy thing that you can think of? What's the most holy object you can think of? Jeffrey, what's the most holy object you can think of? Yeah, a Sefer Torah. A Sefer Torah is our most holy object. And how do we behave towards that Sefer Torah? We treat it with the greatest of respect. We stand up when it's taken out of the ark. We go towards it and we kiss it with reverence. We stand up when it is lifted up. And we kiss it with reverence when we put it away in the Aron again. When we close the Aron and we walk away, we don't turn our back on the Sefer Torah. We walk backwards so as to show it respect. So anything that has Kedusha must be treated with respect. Now, we understand that when it comes to a Sefer Torah. We understand it when it comes to Tefillin, which have Kedusha. But it's a little bit unusual for us to have to start thinking about treating food with Kedusha. Truth is, we really ought to treat food with respect at all times. I'm sure many of you were told as children by your parents that you weren't allowed to throw bread. Yeah, you're not allowed to. I remember that, you know, when the bread was cut on Shabbat and you had a long table, you had to, you know, put it in a basket and pass it round. You weren't allowed to throw it. You don't throw food because you're meant to treat food with respect. Yes, Rachel.
Sorry, I wasn't unmuted. If I look at those psukim, Daled, Hey, Vav, and Zayin, there's nowhere that it says anything about holiness. It's to stop work, just to stop activity. Lishbot, I don't see any holiness there.
Okay, that's why I asked you what kind of day Shabbat was. And that's why Vivian helped me out by straight away saying Shabbat is a holy day, because Shabbat is the day of holiness. Look at Dalet, Bashana Hashviyit, Shabbat Shabbaton. What else is called Shabbat Shabbaton?
Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur, which is, how would you describe Yom Kippur, Rachel? The what day of the year? The holiest day of the year.
I know,
so, although it doesn't use the word Kedusha, you're right. it does not use the word kedusha.
But all
However,
this, that's what it's talking about, is stopping working.
it is. You could have just said lahafsik lavod. Why does it use this word Shabbat, Shabbaton? It's clear that this is a reference to holiness. Shabbat, Shabbaton is Yom Kippur, as you quite rightly point out. If I were to ask Vivian, she would tell me that was the what day of the year? She would say the holiest day of the year. Nachon, Vivian? The holiest day of the year. The Shabbat, the constant reference to Shabbat is telling us, is another Shnat Shabbaton, a year of Shabbat, a year of holiness, a year of rest. You're right, Shabbat means lashevet, to rest, lishbot, to rest, but the implication there is one of holiness. So there's no question that the produce of the Shemitah has an extra level of Kedusha. Food has a level of Kedusha already. We should always treat food with respect, but there's an extra level of Kedusha required for the food of Shemitah. So let's just go on to our next source, okay? The next source is from Shmot. You remember this was the positive commandments. Most of here was the negative commandments. You don't prune, you don't sow, you don't reap. And over here in Shmot, 6 years you sow your land. In the 7th year, you shall release it. That's the mitzvah of being mafkir. Tishmetena unatashta, release and abandon it. Why? V'achlu avyonei amecha. The poor people will eat it, and what's left over, the animals will eat. So we have again, this is just repeated from source sheet number 1, but I've repeated it again here because it's important. Mafkir le'ochla, to eat it, that's according to some, that is a positive commandment. And this, numbers 3 and 4, is what I want to talk about today. Numbers 1 and 2, as I've written here, were dealt with in previous week's shiurim. Today is about numbers 3 and 4. Kedushat Shvi'it, the holiness of the 7th year. So to preserve the holiness of Shemitah produce. That's what we're going to talk about now. Now, the first thing is we need to talk about is what categories of produce have attached to them this additional level of sanctity, this what we call Kedushat Shvi'it, this extra holiness. Well, in some ways, the answer to that question mirrors what we spoke about last week. If you remember last week, we spoke about what was the best way to keep Shemitah. And we had this sort of league table of the best way, the next best way, and until we got to the least best way. And in some ways, this is mirrored in our question here. What categories of produce have Kedushat Shvi'it? So, if you buy your produce at the Otzer Bet Din shop, well, first of all, you wouldn't really be buying your produce because you can't trade in Shemitah produce, can you? What you will be doing is you will be paying a portion of the cost of bringing that produce from the field to the storehouse. So when I say buying your food in Otzer Bet Din, I mean paying for that service, because the food is yours anyway, in the same way as it's mine and everybody else's. That you do not buy Shemitah produce. You in Otzer Bet Din, if you remember, I explained to you, and it's written in the handout from last week, that what you're doing with Otzer Bet Din is paying for the service, for the work that somebody's done to get that bunch of grapes or bag of tomatoes or whatever it is into the place where you're going to go and take them home. So if you get your produce, let's put it that way, from Otzer Bet Din, then all of that produce has pure Shemitah Kedusha. And that's why it is the best way to keep Shemitah. Is it the easiest way to keep Shemitah? No, it's not. It's probably the most difficult way to keep Shemitah. But in some ways, that's exactly why it is the best way to keep Shemitah. Because if it was too easy, then it wouldn't be worth anything, would it? The harder something is, the more value it has when you achieve it. So Otzer Bet Din gives us the highest level of Shemitah produce that you can possibly get, because it has been grown in accordance with Shemitah rules. It's been collected and packaged and brought to the store in accordance with Shemitah rules. And you are also at the same time helping to support the Jewish agriculture in the land of Israel, which is a very important feature. So Otzer Bet Din is the best way to shop, but it gives us thought, I was going to say food for thought there, pardon the pun, with regard to how to look after Shemitah produce. How we do it, I'm going to come to shortly. The moment I'm talking about what categories of food, of produce we need to think about with Kedushat Shvi'it. Number 2, homegrown produce. So that's the stuff that you pick off your own trees, or you pick out of your ground if it's been planted before Shemitah. Stuff that's grown in your own garden. That's also pure Shemitah produce. Not quite as good as Otzer Bet Din, because you're not supporting local farmers. You're supporting yourself, so that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's perfect. It's perfect for the mitzvah of Kedushat Shvi'it. So when I go out and pick off my grapefruit off the trees during Shemitah, or if you come into my garden and pick off my mangoes off my tree, as you're allowed to do during Shemitah, then you have to treat that produce with the sanctity that it deserves, and we'll come to how you do it in a moment. Now, number 3, fruits and vegetables grown by non-Jews in Israel. I should have put in Israel here, otherwise it doesn't count. So fruits and vegetables grown by non-Jews in Israel. Now, according to everybody, apart from the Chazon Ish, that does not have Kedushat Shvi'it. However, the Chazon Ish, who was the Rav of Bnei Brak in the second half of the first half of the 20th century, he was of the opinion, the Chazon Ish usually takes the most machmir position, not always, but the vast majority of the time takes the most stringent position. And his view is that even fruits and vegetables grown by non-Jews in the land of Israel has Kedushat Shvi'it. But anywhere else, it doesn't. Okay, and then we come to the Heter Mechira produce. Now, strictly speaking, this does not have Kedusha at all, because the land has been sold to a non-Jew. That's what the Heter Mechira is all about. Heter means permission, Mechira means sale. It's a permitted sale to a non-Jew. So strictly speaking, this does not have Kedusha. Everybody thinks, those of you that read the leaflet from the source sheet from last week will know this. Most people think that the Heter Mechira began with Rav Kook. It didn't. It began before Rav Kook. Rav Kook re-established it. Most people who hold by the Heter Mechira will be those who adhere to the rulings of Rav Kook. Rav Kook said regarding Heter Mechira that although strictly speaking it does not have Kedusha, we should be strict about it. So I would suggest to you that if you're going to go by the Heter Mechira, which, as I said to you last week, I recommend to you that, although it's not the best way to do it, that you do not make any kind of promise not to use the Heter Mechira, because it's very difficult to go a whole year without using heter mechira. If you're going to use heter mechira, either lechatchila in the first instance, or you're going to use it occasionally when you can't get hold of what you want to use at Otzer Bet Din. If you're going to do that, you're going to be relying on, generally speaking, on the psak of Rav Kook. It doesn't make any logical sense to then say, well, I'm not going to keep this part of Rav Kook, who said we should be stringent about its kedusha. If you're going to go by Rav Kook, then you've got to go by Rav Kook. And Rav Kook was of the opinion that we should be machmir about it. It doesn't have real kedusha, but Rav Kook says that we should treat it as if it does. So for the sake of practicality, I'm putting heter mechira produce in this category of produce which we have to treat as having kedushat shvi'it. Okay. Next one, spices. Spices do have kedushat shvi'it. So even though you may not actually eat them, you may only smell them, they do have kedushat shvi'it, and you have to treat them accordingly. Now, number 6. This is a bit of a minefield here. Flowers is a Mishnah in Shvi'it which talks about flowers which are grown primarily for their smell. Okay. Now, what I'm talking about is not, for example, a bunch of roses that you would buy and happen to smell very nice, because those roses are really grown for what they look like, not what they smell like. Okay. In other words, if you were to buy a bunch of roses for Shabbat and stick them on your Shabbat table, and on Shabbat morning they still looked beautiful, but they didn't smell, you wouldn't throw them away, because actually what you really bought them for was for their beauty. The fact that they smell is a secondary issue. What this is talking about are flowers which are grown primarily for their scent. So things like lavender, which are used in perfume. You get the lavender and you grind it up and you use that in perfume. Those flowers are grown primarily for their scent and not for their beauty. Those kind of things are counted in the category of kedushat shvi'it, and we have to treat them with sanctity. Okay, so there's 6 categories there that I've listed of kind of produce that you have to treat with respect during Shemitah. Now let's have a look at the categories which do not have kedushat shvi'it. Okay, and these fruits and vegetables are to be treated in the same way as you would normally treat them. You don't have to do anything extra or special. Again, I repeat that you're meant to treat food with respect normally, of course, but they don't have the extra kedusha, the extra holiness of Shemitah produce. Let's run through them. Heter mechira, if you don't follow the stringency of Rav Kook, as I've said, it makes no sense to me to keep the heter mechira of Rav Kook and then say, well, I'm not keeping his stringency. But there may be some people that want to do that. Strictly speaking, heter mechira does not have kedushat shvi'it, as we've said. Fruits and vegetables grown by non-Jews. This is talking about on Jewish land, grown by non-Jews, everywhere except Bnei Brak. We said before, Bnei Brak has its own psak by the Chazon Ish. Yerushalayim and everywhere else in the country, fruits and vegetables grown by non-Jews do not have kedushat shvi'it. Okay. 3, vegetables grown on detached bedding. So this is your greenhouse with your pots in it, which do not have holes in, or your pots which are lined with thick plastic with no holes in it, or hydroponically. Why are those free from Kedushat Shvi'it? Because they're not grown in the ground of Eretz Yisrael. They're grown in a pot or in water if they're hydroponics. So they're not grown in the land of Eretz Yisrael. However, as we said right at the beginning, if you have a pot with a hole in it, then even if that pot is stood on a ceramic mirpeset, it's still considered to be attached to the ground because it's got a hole in it. That's what it was designed for. So an unholed pot, which has got vegetables growing out of it inside your greenhouse, you have no problem with in terms of Kedushat Shvi'it. Fungi, so mushrooms, have no Kedushat Shvi'it because they don't grow from the ground. They are fungi. They are living organisms. They're not plants. Unscented flowers. Okay, or number 6, let's do this. Well, unscented flowers. Everybody agrees that flowers that don't smell at all, no Kedushat Shvi'it. Scented flowers, which are primarily for ornamental purposes and not for scent. So that's our bunch of roses, right? Which they're mainly because they're pretty, but you might also like the smell of them. You've got a machloket between Reb Shlomo Zalman, who says they've got no Kedushat Shvi'it, and Rebbe Eliashiv, who says they do. And finally, non-fruit bearing trees do not have Kedushat Shvi'it. Okay, now those are the categories that we have to watch out for and treat properly. These categories we don't need to treat any differently as normal. So, having established which types of food we have to treat properly, let's now talk about what that means to treat it properly. This is important now on a practical basis, what you have to do with your Shemitah produce. Anybody who's got any questions as we go along, there's only 17 of us, so we can manage that. So anybody who's got any questions, just stop me and ask as we go along, because it's very important that you understand this fully, this next bit. Last week's shiur on where to shop and this week's shiur on what to do with your produce are of very, very great practical importance. So I want to make sure that you understand it fully. Yes?
Can I just interrupt very quickly? I'm not nitpicking, but surely what you said about the spices is more important, because you don't smell them only, do you? Because they make up a great, amount of our dish, don't they, really? It's not just smelling, is it?
Spices you put in your food, you're eating it, it's food.
Yeah, but isn't it part of, if it's grown in the ground? It's not. It's not?
Yeah, spices is in the category which does have Kedushat Shvi'it.
Maybe I got it wrong then, because you just said, when you mentioned about the spice, you sort of glossed over, so you just smell those and that's it.
Flowers, that's flowers, Jonathan.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said spices, I'm sorry.
So there's a difference between spices, which is stuff we actually eat, and flowers, which is stuff we don't eat, and they're just there for to look nice, for decoration or for their smell. Spices is a type of food. The reason I've put it in as a separate category is for the reason that you've just raised, because you might have thought that spices are not really food. They're only like, bits of add-ons. But no, they count. They do have Kedushat Shvi'it. So it's good that you raised that, Jonathan. Yes, Lynn.
Can you give us some advice in practical terms about these supermarket chains which do Heter Mechira, etc.?
Yes, I did touch on this last week, and I'll just repeat it. Basically, all the supermarket chains will have a Tu'udat Kashrut hanging up in their fruits and vegetables department. And if you look carefully at that Tu'udat Kashrut, it will tell you that the vast majority of them will tell you that they are produce from food grown with the heter mechira. So if you go to, for example, Rami Levi or Shufasal or the co-op shop here in Poleg, their Tudat Kashrut will say heter mechira. The only one I'm not sure about, and I have to look it up and find out, is Osher Ad. It's possible that Osher Ad will have Yevul Nochri, which is Gentile produce, which, if you have a look at last week's handout, you will see is the least, in my opinion anyway, the least best option.
I think you're right. I think Osher Ad is not heter mechira. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I think
I think it will probably be Yevul Nochri, which is non-Jewish produce, Arab produce, which in my opinion is not the best solution. It's the worst solution. It will not be Otzer Bet Din, because it can't be, because you can't measure or weigh Shmita produce from Otzer Bet Din. We spoke about this last week. Those of you who've forgotten this or want to reread it, you can reread it in the source sheet from last week, or you can go back and have a listen to the shiur. They're all on the YouTube channel, so they're all there as a resource to go back and listen to again if you want to. But I think, Lynn, you'll find that with the exception of Osher Ad, they will mostly be heter mechira. The Otzer, there is one Otzer Bet Din shop. There will be one Otzer Bet Din shop, at least one in Netanya. There will not be one in every street corner. It'll be a hard work to find it and to go there and to queue up, and it'll be a balagan, I promise you. But if you want to do the mitzvah to its highest degree, even if you want to do the mitzvah to its highest degree just once, then go and find the Otzer Bet Din, and then you can treat your produce with the kedusha of Shvi'it, the way we're going to talk about right now. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so back to the way we do it. So we've got the categories of things that we have to treat properly over here. Now we're going to talk about what it means to treat it properly. The first thing is you have to try and finish your Shmita produce. Now that sounds very obvious, doesn't it? But what it means is that don't put on your plate food that you don't think you're going to eat. If you, for example, have gone to Otzer Bet Din and bought some cabbage, right? And you cook your cabbage in your pan, and you take a big load of cabbage on your plate, and you decide halfway through you've had enough, you don't want it, you've got a problem, because you're not really meant to throw away produce that has kedusha, that has holiness. So you need to get into the habit of taking small portions. Now, that's not to say that you can't go back and have seconds if you want, but get into the habit when you're dealing with Shmita produce of taking small portions so that you finish it. Don't be blasé about throwing away food. With Shmita produce, we should try very hard not to throw anything away that is food. Now, sometimes you have no choice. You have to throw stuff away. So, for example, you've got a little bit of salad left in a salad bowl, okay, that nobody's going to eat. What can you do with that? So let's just go back one step to talk about the kedusha of truma and maaser. Okay, when you go to your supermarket, Lynn, you currently, even in non-Shmita years, you'll find a Tudat Kashrut. So why do you need a Tudat Kashrut in the vegetable department of your supermarket? Well, the answer to that is because you need to know that there have been taken truma and maaser, tithes, that the tithes that have to be taken from produce grown in Eretz Israel have been taken. We don't have this problem in England or in Johannesburg, right? You can go to Tesco's or Pick and Go, and you don't have to worry about it because your produce is, generally speaking, not grown in Israel. So it doesn't have to have truma and masa taken from it. But here it does. So you will have a tu'udah in your supermarket that says it's had truma and masa taken from it, which means, by the way, I'm digressing for a minute, but it's worth it. It means, by the way, that when you stop on the side of the road and buy some fruits from an Arab salesman who might be flogging watermelon or strawberries or whatever, you have to take maaser from that because he won't have done it. I think I mentioned to you once, I once went to the market. I used to buy vegetables in the market in Netanya, and I asked the stall holder there if it had taken maaser and truma. Well, you'd have thought I was asking him, you know, if his wife was Jewish. He was so offended that I would ask him such a question, and he pulled out his Tudat kashrut, which said that it was all mu'usar. It had been tithed from underneath his thingy. So we don't have to worry about it when we go to places where people keep the Torah, like supermarkets who've got a Tudah. But if you do it from your own garden, so for example, the other day my wife brought in a melon from our garden, the first melon that we of our season, a Gallia melon. And so I had to cut a piece off, and I had to say a bracha. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu, who's commanded us lahafrish et hatrumot v'et ha'maasrot, to separate the tithes. And then I take a little bit off, and in the times of the Bet HaMikdash, I would take that and give it to the Kohanim and the Leviim. Well, I can't do that anymore because we don't have the sanctity of the Bet HaMikdash. So you have to get rid of it. So do I just chuck it in the bin? No, because it has kedusha, it has holiness. That truma, that maaser that I've taken from that Gallia melon has holiness. You can't just chuck it out. You can chuck it out once it's gone off, right? You're not meant to keep things forever. So once something's gone off and is no longer able to be used, you can chuck it out. So what I have to do with the truma and the maaser that I take from my melon or whatever is wrap it up, put it on one side in a respectful way, and then when it's gone off a bit and it's no longer edible, then I can chuck it out. And by doing that, I'm demonstrating it has separate kedusha, it has holiness. That is the same concept with all the food in all the categories that has kedushat shviyit that we talked about earlier on. So the first thing is try not to have any leftovers. The leftovers that you do have, number two, you cannot just chuck it away. In the same way as I can't just chuck away the truma and the maaser that I've separated. You have to treat it with respect. So one of the ways to do it is you should have a special receptacle. So a separate little bin, a little waste bin or something, which should be designated for food remnants that have kedusha. Line it with a bag of some description. Those biodegradable bags are very good for that. And put the food, the kedushat shviyit remnants, into this special receptacle. That shows that you're not just chucking it away. You're giving it the true sanctity that it requires. Now, each day you can take the bag, the end of the day, take the bag with all the remnants in, tie it up, put it on one side, and then in a day or two, when the food is no longer edible, then you can throw it away. That demonstrates to yourself and to everybody else, but mainly to yourself, that you are treating this food with the sanctity that it requires. Now, number 4 is rather a nice thing to do. Make a nice sign that says Kedushat Shvi'it. This is a mitzvah that we're doing here. It's not a bind. It's not something which is a pain in the neck to do. Oh, I've got to have an extra bin here. I've got to have a special bin for all the bits of rubbish that I've got off my table. Who on earth puts bits of rubbish in a special bin? Well, are we bonkers or what? Yeah, we are bonkers, because, you know, this is what we do. The Torah makes you bonkers. But if you think of it as bonkers, then it's bonkers. But if you think of it as a mitzvah, if you think of it as I described this whole course that we're doing, a once in 7 years opportunity, or in our case, my second time in my life opportunity, and for some of you, the first time in your life that you'll ever have been able to keep Shemitah properly, because it's the first time you're in Eretz Yisrael for Shemitah year. It could be a once, twice, 3 times in a life opportunity only. So if we think of it as something stupid and bonkers, well, then we've missed out. If we think of it as something to be got around, okay, I'll do the Heter Mechira, but I won't keep the stringency of Rav Kook, and therefore I don't need to worry. I can just chuck everything in the bin. Nothing's got Kedushat Shvi'it. I'll only buy Yavul Nochri, non-Jewish produce. I won't go to Otza Bet Din. I won't have anything out of my garden. I'll just avoid the problem altogether. If you think that way, then you are missing out. If you think that way, that Shemitah is a problem, then you have a problem. You have a problem with the way you think, because that is not what it's about. What it's about is to see it as an opportunity to perform a mitzvah, which is very special mitzvah, connected to Eretz Yisrael, that for thousands of years our ancestors were unable to do. And now we are able to do it. We should grasp that opportunity with both hands. So try to finish your, first of all, try and have some Shemitah produce. So go to Otza Bet Din, or come to my garden or your neighbor's garden, or your own garden even. And then when you have it, think about it and try to finish it. Work hard at not throwing away Shemitah produce. Think about the Kedusha of the land whilst you're eating it. Because in the same way as we described in week 1, that when you eat in your sukkah, you're elevating the mere act of eating or sitting or sleeping into something holy. You have the opportunity during the Shemitah year to make your eating not just an ordinary eating, but an eating with elevated sanctity of Shemitah. So try and get hold of Shemitah produce, try and eat it, try and finish it. And then if you do have bits and bobs where you're bound to, treat it with sanctity. Don't throw it in a bin. Make a special receptacle and put a nice sign on it saying Kedushat Shvi'it. This is has got holiness to it, and I'm recognizing the mitzvah. So that's the practical way to deal with the remnants from Shemitah produce. Now, things that are not edible, we're on to number 5 here. Things that are not edible at all, like banana skins. No normal human being eats banana skins, right? You can just throw those away because they're not edible. In the same way as non-fruit bearing trees don't have Kedushat Shvi'it, peels that are not edible can be thrown away normally. Now, why did I use banana skins as an example? Because to the best of my knowledge, nobody covers banana skins with chocolate, wraps them up and sells them in halpans on Erev Pesach with a hechsher on it, right? Nobody eats banana skins, but orange peel, right? Those of us who are of a certain vintage from Chutz La'aretz will know that orange peel covered in chocolate is a delicacy. which is only available Erev Pesach at some ridiculous price, but nevertheless, it's available and it's a delicacy. So you can eat orange peel. So orange peel would not be a good example of number 5. Orange peel would be food that you have to treat with respect, because you could also grate an orange peel or a lemon peel and use the zest in your cooking. If you were to make duck à l'orange, you would have orange peel. If you make marmalade, you would use orange peel. If you make lemon meringue pie, you would have the zest of your lemon. So these are things, although they're peels, they're edible. So I use banana skins as an example of something which is part of a fruit or a vegetable, depending on what you consider a banana to be, but it's not edible. So in order to have Kedushat Shvi'it, it has to be edible. That's number 5. Now, number 6. So peels with fruit still on it. So citrus skins, and I use citrus, probably grapefruit. I don't think most normal people won't eat grapefruit skins. I've never seen grapefruit skins covered in chocolate and sold in shops, but let's say you had some, but after squeezing it, or if you had like a nectarine stone in the middle where you get the stone out and it's still got some fruit attached to it, theoretically, the stone itself doesn't have Kedusha because it's not going to be eaten. But because it's got some fruit left on it, you can't get all of it. It makes sense to treat it with Kedusha if possible. Right, number 7, leftovers can be fed to animals. So, for example, if you are lucky enough, as I am, to have chickens in your garden, those chickens are fed on leftover scraps. So you will ask me, can I give my leftover Shmita produce, can I feed them to the animals? Well, you would know the answer to that. You don't need me to tell you that, do you? Because you have all read it in the Psukim. There it is. And all of its produce may be eaten by your domestic animals and the beasts that are in your land. So the Psukim themselves tell us that Shemitah produce can be fed to animals. It is not considered to be treating Shemitah produce with a lack of sanctity if you give it to animals. On the contrary, those of you who have leftover foods that are Shemitah and you put them in your special receptacle, if you don't want to leave them hanging around to go off before you chuck them out, bring them to us and we'll feed them to the chickens. And thereby we will fulfill the mitzvah of the Psukim in Bahar, because we will have given the food le'ochla, to eat for yourselves, and the leftovers we'll give to the animals. Now, why is it a mitzvah to give the leftover Shemitah to the animals? Because there's a pasuk that tells you it. Look at this. In the 7th year, you shall release it and abandon it. The poor of your people shall eat it. And what they leave over, the beasts of the field shall eat. Very clear, a positive mitzvah in the Torah to feed Shemitah leftovers to the animals. Here you have another opportunity to do a mitzvah that your mates in Edgware or Kenton or Broughton Park or Johannesburg or wherever you might come from have got no opportunity to do. How lucky are we? How lucky are our chickens that they're going to get all these lovely scraps during the next year? So that is number 7. What now? This is something interesting. This is something interesting. Number 8, not something that you would think about unless you thought about it. What do we do when we make Havdalah? We pour out wine and we overflow the cup, do we not? And then we stick the candle, we extinguish the candle in the spilt out wine. Yeah, we all do that, don't we? That's how you make Havdalah. Now, if you look at your wine bottle, your Kedem wine or your Barkan wine or your whatever it is that you use for Kiddush and Havdalah, let's assume this was a bottle. It's not, this is an empty bottle of water, but let's say it was my bottle. You would have on it a little label with a hechsher. And that hechsher on your wine is telling you a number of things. It will tell you that it is not yayin nesech or stam yainam. It is not wine that has been tainted by use for non-Jewish sacramental purposes. It is kosher wine, but it will also say that there is no concern about orla, that is the fruit of the first 3 years that you can't use. And it will also tell you that there is no worry that this is shviit, 7th year wine. Why is it telling you that? You cannot drink wine which is yayin nesech or stam yainam, and you cannot drink wine that is made from orla, but you can drink wine that is made from shviit produce, from Shmita produce, as long as it's made in the correct way, as long as it's made and grown and harvested, etc., in a Shmita correct way. But what you can't do is treat it with the lack of respect. Now, so the 99.99% of wine that you'll buy will have a hechsher to say it's not Shmita wine. But what if you make your own wine? Right? Quite a lot of people make their own wine. You make your own wine, and let's say you make your wine from Shmita grapes. Let's say you've got grapevines in your garden. My son up in the Galil, who lives in a place called Ein Yaakov in the Galil, he has in his garden tons and tons of grapes. They're not ready yet, but they will be ready. And when they are ready, there's no way he's going to be able to eat all those grapes. They'll have a bellyache. There's hundreds of them, literally hundreds and hundreds of grapes. So we're going to, no doubt my wife will make wine out of them, or raisins or something. So let's say you make wine out of your Shmita grown grapes. That wine has Shmita Kedusha. We've already said you can't treat it without respect. You can't just chuck it away. So you've got a problem if you're going to make Havdalah and overflow the cup. Because unless you do what your mummies and grandmummies told you not to do, which is to lick the plate, then that wine is going to go to waste. That wine that you spill over onto the Havdalah plate, you're going to throw it away. And you can't do that. So if you're going to use Shmita wine for Havdalah, do not overflow the cup. And you have to finish the cup. You can't throw it away down the sink because it's got Kedusha, it's got holiness. So be careful with Havdalah, and it goes for Kiddush as well. If you're going to make Kiddush, normally you just have to drink Rov Kos. You have to drink the majority of the cup. But if you've got Shmita wine, you've grown your own wine, grapes, and got wine which has got Shmita sanctity, for Kiddush, you have to drink the whole lot because you can't leave the leftovers. And for Havdalah, you can't spill it over. Number 9, similarly, at Pesach, we all do this, don't we? Dam, Safadeya, Kinim. We all take a drop of wine out of the cup and put it on the plate when we say the 10 plagues at Seder night, yeah? You're all familiar with that minhag? Not if you've got Shmita wine. If you make your own wine for Pesach out of Shmita grapes, you can't do that because that is wasting Shmita produce. It's not treating it with appropriate sanctity. It's throwing it away. So if the wine is Shmita produce, we do not dip our finger in the wine and take a drop out with each plague. Okay, that is how we treat Shemitah with sanctity. There is one more little section which I had intended to add in here and forgot to do so. So I will put together a further source sheet on it and send it to you. But I'll just spend the last 5 minutes talking about it, even though there is nothing on the handout because I forgot to add it in. And that is something called Biur. Now you'll know that word. Where have you heard that word from? Who can tell me where we've had that word Biur before?
Biur chametz.
Thank you, Charlie. Biur chametz, which means?
Oh, done enough tonight.
Go on.
Searching for chametz.
No,
Burning.
it doesn't mean that.
Burning.
Yeah, well, it means to destroy.
Oh.
It means to destroy. Some say so. It means to destroy, to get rid of. So we do bedikat chametz, which is searching for chametz, and then on the morning of Erev Pesach we do biur chametz. We get rid of it. We burn it. That's sreifat chametz. We actually burn it, or we are mevatel. We disown it. And that's called biur chametz. The word biur means to destroy or to remove. So, with regard to Shemitah, there is a concept of biur. Let me put you back on the screen here. Actually, there is something about it. I mentioned it over here, number 4. Biur, to remove Shemitah produce from the house when there is no longer anything left of that species in the field. That is biur in a sentence. So what it means is that each type of produce, each fruit, each type of vegetable growth or whatever it is, has a season. If you live in Western Europe, you will be forgiven for thinking that things don't have seasons, because you can get watermelons all the year round, but not so in Israel, actually, and certainly not so in nature. Everything has a season. Now, there is a special mitzvah in the Shemitah year not to own any Shemitah produce if the season is over for that produce. So, for example, the season for watermelons, they're pretty much done by what? After Sukkot, October, November time, yeah? You're not going to find much in the way of watermelons after that. So the end of that season, whatever the date is, and then there's an official date for each thing, and each Erev Shemitah year, there's a list of dates and produces made, which once I get it, I'll send it out to you so that you know exactly when to do your biur. So let's just use our example of watermelons, and let's say it's November. So beginning of November, let's say watermelon season's over. There's no more watermelons in the fields. We have to get rid of it. Why? Well, there's a machloket as to why, but it seems that it's to do with this pasuk here, number 11. In the 7th year, shall release it, abandon it. It's talking about the fields. Poor of your people shall eat it, and what they leave over, the beasts of the field shall eat. So the Chachamim said, when there's nothing left in the fields of that particular produce for the beasts to eat, then you can't eat it either. Because you don't own the food any more than the animals do. It's just as much belonging to the animals as it is to you. And therefore, if it's not fair, if there's nothing for the animals in the field of that particular produce, then you can't have it either, and you have to do biur. It's demonstrating your lack of mastership, your lack of ownership over the produce. So, at the correct time of the year, when a certain fruit or vegetable is over in the fields, then you have to do biur. And how do you do it? There are some that say you burn it. for example, who was it that says it? I read it somewhere, can't remember now. Can't remember which of the poskim say you burn it. Other of the poskim, for example, the Chazon Ish, says you mustn't burn it. Why? Because that's not Kedusha. You're just not treating it with Kedusha. You mustn't do that. You declare it Hefker. So what you do is you put it on your doorstep or in a prominent place and you say, I am mafkir, this food, anybody can come and take it. Everyone comes and takes it. You're allowed to keep enough for 3 meals. That's the halacha. 3 meals for each member of your household. You're allowed to keep after the time of Biur. That's from the Mishnah in Shvi'it and the Rambam. So that's how you get rid of your stuff. That's called Biur. And I'll write a little note about that and send it out at the end of sometime next week. Yes, Ella.
Hi. So how will I know that that's the end of the season? Like,
Okay,
should I
so
rely
there's a
on,
list. The Bet Din produce a list of dates and vegetables. So there will be a list which will be produced usually in Chodesh Elul before Shemitah year begins, and it will say on such and such a date, that is the date of Biur for carrots or for watermelon or for whatever it is. And there'll be a whole list of different dates and produce which you can follow. You stick that on your fridge and then you know what to do and when to do it. Okay?
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Okay. One last thing I want to mention to you before I stop and ask for questions. And this, I think, is very important. And that is, and I know, Jonathan Raymond, if you're still with me, this is something that you and I discussed, and it's important. And that is, how do you behave with regard to other people's kashrut during Shemitah? Right? So Jonathan said to me the other day, it's a bit tricky, this, isn't it? I don't think we're going to be able to eat out over the whole of Shemitah. How do I know what people do? And it's a good question. It's a good question. But if you think about it, it's only really the same question that we have regarding kashrut in general. So if I'm invited out to somebody's house, I make a decision as to whether the food that I'm likely to be served in this house is kosher. And I will make a decision as to whether it is kosher enough for me to eat. And if I don't think it's kosher enough for me to eat, well, I won't go. If I do go, then that means that the food is kosher enough for me to eat. And I'm quoting Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach now, if you go to somebody's house who is kosher and his level of kashrut is not up to your level of kashrut, what you would keep at home, then either don't go or go and eat. Don't go and not eat, or at least don't go and not eat very obviously, right? Because that is rude. And Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach himself said that when he gets invited to a wedding, if he goes to a wedding and it's kosher, even if it's not the same hechsher he would have at home, he will eat it. And that is how a mensch behaves. You don't like the kashrut? Don't go. But if you're going, then eat. And in some ways, the same thing applies with Shemitah, and I would say only less so. Because remember, there are many opinions that say that Shemitah is not a deoraita today. It's only a derab only. I don't mean to minimize that, but it's only a derabanan. Secondly, there are what we say, yesh al mi lismoch. There is people upon whom you can rely, that various things that you might not want to do and consider to be proper, doesn't necessarily mean it's not kosher or it's wrong. So for example, I might not want to keep the heter mechira, but if I'm invited out somewhere, that person should say to me, I'd like you to come for dinner. By the way, we keep heter mechira. I can then make my decision. If I don't want to go because I don't keep heter mechira, then that's my prerogative and I can politely decline. However, if I'm going to go, even if I don't eat heter mechira, then I can eat heter mechira, because heter mechira is not treif, it's not wrong. There is plenty people frummer than me that keep heter mechira, and so therefore it's an arrogance on my behalf to go somewhere and say, I'm frummer than you and I'm not eating your food. That is not right. So if you decide that you're going to keep a certain level, or you're going to try bli neder to keep a certain level of shmita, then that doesn't oblige you to stick to that if you go out somewhere else. Obviously, it's got to be kosher, and obviously the people that you're going to eat with, you would rely on, that would not buy proper Shmita produce. You've actually got to go pretty much out of your way to buy Shmita produce that's not produced correctly in this country. You probably get it in Tiftan, but any supermarket that you go to will have a Tudat Kashrut, and it will tell you probably that's heter mechira. So you've not got a problem with that. You want to be dead from and only eat Otza Bet Din, gesund hate. I'll see how far you'll get into the year. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying don't make a neder. Don't make any kind of promises that you're not going to eat heter mechira, because it's very difficult to keep it for the year. So in terms of eating out, I would say it's an extension of what you would already do. If you wouldn't eat there because of kashrus, then don't eat there because of shmita, and vice versa. If you're a host, then I think it's correct for you to inform your guests what your level of shmita observance is. And also it's important that you tell your guests that this is shmita produce or not shmita produce. So for example, if you bought Yavul Nochri, you bought non-Jewish produce, I wouldn't need to worry so much about taking an extra bit of cabbage and leaving it on my plate, right? If I didn't like your cabbage, I could leave it. But if it was heter mechira, or worse or better, depending on which way you look at it, if it was Otza Bet Din cabbage, even if I didn't like it, I'd have to eat it, because I wouldn't want to throw it away because it's got Kedushat Shvi'it. Jeffrey, this is heaven made for you, Shmita. You can go around eating everybody's leavings.
You mustn't waste it.
Absolutely. This is your mitzvah. You know, everybody has a mitzvah that they take on board for themselves, right? There was one guy that stories are told about who took on board shatnez. In England, many years ago, shatnez, and not that many years ago, 50, 80 years ago or something, shatnez was a very neglected mitzvah. There was one guy apparently who got a bee in his bonnet about shatnez, and learnt about shatnez and taught shatnez, and pretty much the whole of English shatnez keeping is down to him, and that was his big mitzvah. So Jeffrey, this is your opportunity. Eating shmita food is your mitzvah for the year, okay? You've got my permission, but don't tell Rose that I said so. Okay, fine. So in summary, what we've done today, we've learnt about the different categories of food which have holiness of shmita, which comes from the Shabbat, Shabbaton idea in the Torah. These categories have to be treated with respect of Shmita Kedusha. These ones don't. What we do and how we behave with our Shmita remnants We have to be careful. We have to think about it. We have to treat it with kedusha. We have to realize that it has extra sanctity, and the rather esoteric things that we might not have thought of. The Havdalah wine and the dipping out at Pesach is just an example of how careful we have to be. We spoke about Biur, which is getting rid of certain products out of the house at the end of their season. And finally, we spoke about eating out during Shemitah. And by the time I've done the fourth source sheet, which are the few bits and pieces that I missed out here, if you put all four source sheets together, you should have a reasonably comprehensive guide on a practical basis of how to go through Shemitah in the coming year. If you want more detail and you want really good, solid, easy to read, but very, very thorough, I recommend this book here called Shemitah by Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon. It's in English or Hebrew. It's available from all good bookstores. It's made by Maggie's Books. I'm sure you can get it online as well. It is beautifully produced. It's a wonderful book, and I recommend it. Any questions, feel free to ask a competent rabbi. If you can't find a competent rabbi, you can ask me, and I will do my best to answer your questions. So, any questions on Shemitah, either from start to finish? Wow, no questions. Yes,
What
Rachel.
about dipping the fingers inside of the wine on Havdalah?
Say that again.
Dipping the tips of the fingers in the wine
Yes.
on Havdalah?
Why would you? I don't understand the question. Ellie. What, you want to dip your finger in instead of spill it over?
Because we can't spill it over anymore.
Oh, you mean when you want to put it on your head in your pockets?
Yeah.
Ah, I see. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure you can put it on your head in your pockets, actually, because that's also not eating it, is it?
Right.
So I don't know. I'll have to think about that one, Ella, whether I suspect that you can't do that.
Yeah, then we can use the wine that produced.
Well, you don't have to worry, because all the wine that you will use, unless you make your own, will not have Kedushat Shvi'it. It's only really homemade wine that you have to worry about, because everything that you buy commercially in a bottle will have on it that it's not Shvi'it wine. So in practice, this is only for the homemade wine makers. So you don't have to worry about it.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Unless you plan on making wine. Yes, Rachel.
Right. Is the dating of Shemitah an absolute date, or is it something that was started in Israel at a particular time? I mean, do we have a continuous of 2,000 years of Shemitah exactly on the 7th year?
Okay. The real answer to that is no. There are, in the same way as the Tchelet, you can see the Tchelet logo behind me. The Tchelet on my tzitzit here, okay? It's only 95% sure that that is Tchelet. We have a fair Masorah that the Shemitah that we're keeping is the correct year. Is it certain to be the correct year? No, it's not. And we have certainly lost the count of Yovel. So we don't know where the Yovel is. There were some people that would say we don't know when Shemitah is either, and it's a bit arbitrary. But it's a good question. But there's enough people that think that it's good enough to be able to do it.
So, Rabbi, Mr. Shiur, I don't understand the Shemitah food. Is it the food that was planted before the Shemitah year that's been carried on growing in the Shemitah year?
That's absolutely correct.
I thought the fields had to be fallow for the whole year, so I thought it had to be cleared.
That's right. That's right, Brian. So, for example, fruit on a tree. That
Yeah.
tree was planted before Shmita, right? It was planted 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 10 years ago. The fruit just grows on its own, right?
Yes.
So that fruit is okay to eat. What you can't do is to take a bunch of let's say, tomato seeds and plant them in Shmita year.
But can you plant them a week before so they grow during Shmita year?
Well,
and then
not a week before, no, but you can plant them a few weeks before so that a significant amount of growth has already taken place before Shmita. So, Brian, I'll send you the link to the first shiur, and you'll be able to go through all that very carefully. Any other questions? Okay. In that case, I shall bid you a fond farewell. Any questions that you think of afterwards, feel free to either email me or WhatsApp me or phone me, and I'll do my best to accommodate. I'll try and send out the source sheet 4 in the next week or so, and then you should have a whole comprehensive little package.
Johnny, can I just ask, forgive me, my phone just rang, if I might have missed it. I think you were going to tell us if you found a shop that did Otzebet Din here in Netanya.
There is one, but I haven't found it yet because I don't think they've made it yet. So in other words, I don't know where it will be yet. There will be one for absolute certain because there was one last time. Whether it will be in the same place or not, I don't know. So as soon as I know, I'm going to keep my eyes and ears open for it. As soon as I know, I will send out on the Tchelet various fora that information for Netanya and wherever else that I can find the information for, so that everybody can use it if they can.
Thank you. Fab.
Me, I'd like to congratulate you on your explanations and everything you've sent out. It's really, really easy to understand, and you know, really well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Sorry,
you very much.
Rabbi, in Israel, in certain common areas, they have orange trees that just grow in the street. So if you pick those orange, is that the mitzvah of eating Shmita food?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You pick that, you eat it, and then you treat the peel and the leftovers with the kedusha that we spoke about today. You have done a mitzvah that you can only do in Eretz Israel. Yeah. How great is that? Worth coming back to Israel for, Brian. Come on, let's have you back.
I can't wait.
We're missing you.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Laila Tov, everyone.
Many thanks. Thank you very much.